My name is Rob. I am an iOS engineer for Capital One UK. I'm based in Nottingham. Accessibility is something that I'm personally really interested in, and I always really love to hear about people's experiences about accessibility and assistive technology, whether that's from a developer perspective or whether you or friends or family have had a good or a bad experience with assistive technology. As long as they're happy to share, obviously, I'd really love it if you could reach out to me, because I'm always interested to hear. I work at Capital One. This is our app. We're a credit card company, so it's a pretty full-featured card servicing app. You can view your balance, see your transactions. We've got some nice extra features in there as well that maybe you wouldn't expect, like you can see your PIN, you can report your card lost or stolen, see your credit score, get real-time push transaction notifications, increase your limit, that kind of stuff. Not necessarily too relevant to you guys because we don't have an office here, but we've got really lovely offices in London and in Nottingham if you fancy moving somewhere new. We're always looking for people involved in mobile. I'm trying to skim through this really quickly because I don't have as much time as I thought I would do, but I do have to say it because they're paying for me to be here, so it's fine. Digital accessibility, assistive technology, and digital inclusion. So those are the things that I'm going to talk about this evening. They all they're different terms, they all kind of mean the same thing, but they all do have slightly distinct different meanings as well. So I'm going to talk about those things this evening. So before I start, I just wanted to get an idea from the room as to if anybody uses any form of assistive technology. So if you don't mind, if you would stick your hand up to get an idea. Okay. Sorry? Okay. Okay. What doesn't work about it?
The ears just totally dead.
Okay. Yeah, mine too. I wear it anyway, but it doesn't do anything. Okay. That's more than normal. So, okay, maybe you guys are ahead of me. So, I'm going to press that button. Oh, excellent. So, why am I passionate about accessibility? For me, it started a few years ago. Before I was an iOS dev, I used to run an Apple reseller, and it was a real privilege to kind of work somewhere like that, just because you got to meet people who were all kind of various different stages along their technology journey. So you would get people who kind of ask these really involved questions that you'd have to go away and research and get back to them with an answer. Some people, you'd be speaking to them and they'd be buying their first kind of really anything that we call a computer. So they'd get an iPad or an iPhone and they'd never had anything like a computer before, and they were just learning it new. It was always really enjoyable to me to kind of observe what they were using and what they picked up on and what they found difficult or easy, and kind of how everyone was different there. But there was one thing that happened while I was working there that really got me interested in thinking about what accessibility meant. And it wasn't any particular customer, it was something that Apple did. And that was when Apple released FaceTime. With FaceTime, obviously these days, I mean, all of you guys have probably used some kind of video calling feature today at work. You use FaceTime or Skype or Zoom or something like that, and you can instantly contact people anywhere in the world if you want to, and you can see them face to face. Back when Apple kind of released FaceTime, it was pretty revolutionary that you could do something like that on something that you could hold in your hand. And for most of us, it kind of added in this extra thing to making a phone call that you could now see people face to face, which is really lovely. But once Apple released FaceTime, I noticed a change in the people that would come into the shop. We had a huge number of people who were deaf and hard of hearing. And that was because with FaceTime, Apple had kind of done something for these people that really had changed how things work for them entirely. It wasn't just like a nice new kind of extra thing. People whose first language is sign language had not been able to use telephones for 120 years, however long the rest of us have been using telephones. If you can't hear, then the telephone's not really going to be much use to you because you can't hear what the person on the other end is saying. With FaceTime, because you can now see them, these people could communicate in their first language with anyone anywhere in the world. So for them it was really transformative, and so we would get a huge number of people who had sign language as their first language suddenly coming into the shop to buy iPhones and iPads just so they can do that. And this happened really not because Apple were thinking about how do we make a great product for people who use sign language. They were thinking about how can we make a great product that's going to work for everyone. And really mobile is kind of full of features like that. I apologise, I'm an iOS dev, so they're all iOS things, but you Android people can probably think of something that's like one of them but shitter. I like the delayed hiss. These things here, these are all things from Apple's accessibility website. These aren't just kind of things I've picked out. If you go to apple.com/accessibility, these are the features that it mentions. So things like Siri and Siri shortcuts. Siri is fantastic for people who can't see the phone because they don't have to know where the letters are on the keyboard to type. They can just ask the phone to do something. It's great for people with motor issues. They don't have to be so accurate, or they don't have to touch the phone at all. They can just speak to it. For people with learning difficulties or dyslexia or something like that, it means they don't have to be so accurate. Things like dictation, autocorrect, and spell checking. Voice memos, again, it removes the need for accuracy. So if you struggle to express yourself in a written form, either because of dyslexia or motor issues, that doesn't really matter so much with these features. And then screen time and Safari Reader are really great features as well for accessibility. So things like Safari Reader, we might kind of think, oh, it's a nice little thing that kind of gets rid of adverts and extra distractions, but people with maybe ADHD or with some kind of attention disorder or anxiety disorder, they can get quite upset and quite worried by things happening in the periphery or by too much stimulation, like on social media and things like that. And so these features really help people like that focus and makes the phone a less stressful experience. So I think now if I kind of asked for you guys to put your hands up again, we'd be pretty close to 100% of people saying that they use a feature like this. Accessibility and accessibility features are not about people being different and people just not doing things in the way that we normally would. It's just about customization and just about making things work better for you. And all of those features just happened because Apple were thinking about how can we make a product better for everyone, rather than thinking about how do we make accessibility features. There is a phrase that we sometimes use in software, which I think sometimes can stop us from thinking in this kind of way, and that is the word "the user." There's a quote that only drug dealers and software companies call their customers users. I don't even think that's necessarily true, because drug dealers probably call their customers still. I mean, I've never sold drugs, but I think if I did, I'd probably call the person buying it a customer because they're a customer, right? It's really only like the media and the police maybe that actually call them users. So really only just leaves software companies. I'm not saying stop using the word user. I don't think there's anything specifically wrong with the word user. I use it myself. I'm not telling you what language to use. The problem that I think is that sometimes that phrase can stop us from thinking about our customers as individuals, as people who are different, have different needs and wants and desires, different abilities, different things that they want to use in your software. And sometimes we end up then thinking of the user as just this amorphous blob that's kind of somewhere out there that we'll probably never meet, where in reality they're all individual. After all, you've never met a normal person because there is no such thing. For some reason, some of my slides have kind of, I don't know why.
I thought that was on purpose.
It's the future.
Yeah, it is. Can I have a sip from a comically small candy. So can't be trusted with full-size candy. So that leads me on to the title of the talk. Accessibility without the V word. So some of you are probably ahead of me on this one, and hopefully you'll have guessed what the V word is, but for me the V word is voiceover. But what I mean by that, for you guys it might not necessarily be voiceover. It could be dynamic text sizes, or it could be maybe tagging images, particularly if you work on the web, or maybe if you work in design it could be checking that contrast ratios work with the WCAG guidelines, for example. What I mean by the V word is when I'm making a screen or a flow in our app, I'll kind of finish off the screen, make sure it fills the acceptance criteria, and I'll just be about to pass it over to our testers for them to check over, and I'll go, oh, you know what, I should probably just make sure that works with VoiceOver, because if I don't, then our accessibility team will raise a ticket, or we'll get a bad review on the App Store, or particularly if you work for a US company, there's always the threat of legal action as well over accessibility not being as good as it could be. Although I should point out you do have the same legal requirements in the UK as you do in the US, it's just that people don't tend to sue so much, so you should all be doing accessibility. I think it's worthwhile considering what we mean by disability. This news story came up at the beginning of the year on the BBC News website. This photo had been shared quite a bit on Facebook. So it's a photo of a lady with a white cane, but she's also holding a smartphone, and she appears at least to be looking at the smartphone. The comment that it was shared with on Facebook was, if you see it, say I see it. So the obvious implication there being that people were kind of referring to the fact that she's, you know, presenting as blind by having a white cane, but she is pretty clearly looking at a phone. I don't suspect anyone here would be kind of ignorant enough to join in on that, but we know, because we're mobile devs, that there's things that you can do on a smartphone that's going to make it easier to use. That maybe she's got the text size up really high, maybe she's using screen zoom, maybe she's using a screen reader, and just that's kind of the natural way you hold it when you're using a phone. Maybe she's got some kind of visual impairment where she can only see a tiny amount in the middle of her vision, so she can see when it's kind of close up there, but she can't see anything further away. Incidentally, I think it's kind of worth pointing out about the white cane, something that not everyone is aware of with white canes. The white cane isn't so much for the person who's got the white cane. The white cane is more for you, so that you know that the person is potentially not going to see you as you're walking past or as you're driving along. I think a useful definition, a useful way of defining what disability is comes from the World Health Organization, and not so much specifically in their definition, but in the way that their definition has changed. So this is the original World Health Organization definition. A disability is any restriction or lack of ability resulting from an impairment to perform an activity in the manner or within the range considered normal for a human being. So this is referring to disability as a feature of the person, essentially saying that this is, you know, you're disabled if you can't do something that we would reasonably expect you to be able to do. They updated this definition around about 20 years ago now. Disability is not just a health problem. It is a complex phenomenon reflecting the interaction between features of a person's body and features of the society in which he or she lives. And there should be bold on this, but that's another thing that's gone a bit weird in my slides, I don't know why. But I think the important part really of this definition is kind of the bit here, features of the society. Disability is not something about a person. It's not something that is different about a person or something that makes a person different. Disability happens in the margins between someone's abilities and the society that we've created around them. Because everybody has abilities. You know, we all here are capable of doing some things and not others. We all here have our own abilities and limits to them, and we can work with those. But sometimes society builds up kind of these systems, or be they physical or just in the way that we kind of work as a society, or in software that we build, where that really amplifies things that we can't do, things that aren't within our abilities. And so that could be, for example, only building steps up to a building instead of building a ramp. Or it could be having a really long form to fill in instead of reducing the amount of data that we need to capture, or using data that we already know about, for example. In the UK, 22% of people report having a disability. It's around about 14 million people in the UK. Globally, that number's at 1 billion people who experience some form of disability. So it's a large number of people. So if you're not considering disability in your software and how that works, then that's a lot of people you're saying that our software is not for you, you can't use it. And that's not hyperbole on my part, that's a genuine thing. In the UK, 20% of disabled adults have never used the internet. And that's over double what it is for the normal population. And I put this in because there's always the question about, well, why should we prioritise accessibility? Aside from the fact that you have a legal requirement to do it, Barclays believe it's worth a lot of money if you think about how your software is inclusive. So Microsoft are one of the best resources for talking about digital inclusion. So I highly recommend visiting their website and taking a look if you want to kind of think about this a little bit more. But one of the main teaching tools they use is something called the persona spectrum. So it starts with what they would call a permanent situation, which would be, for example, someone with one arm. I think we pretty much all agree if you only have one arm permanently, it's going to be pretty disabling. There's going to be a lot of stuff that you just are going to struggle to do because our society is built for people with two arms. So if you consider how your software is going to work for someone with one arm, then you're also going to be helping people with a temporary impairment. So, for example, someone with an arm injury, their arm's going to get better, but there's going to be at least a few weeks where they're not going to have use of their arm. So they will appreciate the fact that you've considered that your app works one-handed. And situational. So as someone who's just had a baby is going to spend a lot of time holding their baby. So again, if they want to use a smartphone, they're going to have to do it one-handed. So if you've considered how someone with one arm is going to use your app, then someone who's just had a baby is going to appreciate that as well. My own personal example here is if I go walking my dog and try and play Pokemon Go at the same time, it's quite awkward, especially with a larger phone. So if I could do that with like voice control, that would be a lot better. Microsoft did some research to go along with this. In the United States, 26,000 people a year will suffer from the loss of upper extremities. So that's 26,000 people, new people every year, who will need to use your app one-handed. But if you include people with temporary and situational impairments, the number is greater than 20 million. So if you include people with new babies and people with arm injuries, that's 20 million people a year who are going to appreciate that you've considered how your app works with one hand. Other examples of a temporary situation could be wearing a cast, or if you're on a foreign holiday and you don't speak the language, for example. And situational, it could be if you're in a large crowd and there's a lot of noise, then an app that is reliant on speech or reliant on sound is not going to be that great. If you're driving a car, then obviously being able to use an app without actually looking at the screen is probably a good idea. And if you're in bright sun, again, you're not going to be able to see the screen so well. Everyone has abilities and limits to those abilities. Designing for people with permanent disabilities actually results in designs that benefit people universally. So it's all about just considering people and considering that everybody is different. In terms of what disability means, there is a phrase that some disabled people will sometimes use to refer to people who aren't disabled, and that is not yet disabled. And it's a little bit glib, but it's kind of true, right? If by thinking about accessibility, you're really thinking about future you. At some point, might not be nice to think about, but at some point you're going to need to use some of these accessibility features. Maybe it'll just be that your eyesight starts to fade and you need to use larger text. But it could be that, you know, as you get older, your mental cognition begins to fade a little bit, or maybe you lose motor ability. If you develop something like diabetes, which can develop during later life, then you're going to lose sensation and conductivity in your fingertips, which means that you're less likely to be able to use a touchscreen. Means that your eyesight's likely to fade as well. So it's not just about considering people's disability, but we need to consider what people are able to do as well. In the UK, 10% of the population haven't used the internet recently. And if you remember, we were talking about the people who identify as being disabled, that's double that. 8.4% of adults have never used the internet. The government, when they are creating software, they use this tool called the Digital Inclusion Scale. And they actually use this as a testing tool. So this, when the government are kind of finishing a project and they will go to user testing and they will invite a whole bunch of people in, and before they get hands-on with the product, they will ask them a bunch of questions about what these people do online, what equipment they use, what their internet access is like, what kind of things they do daily, or there's a regular or irregular thing on the internet. And they use the scale to plot them against so that they know they're always going to have someone with various different skills when they're testing it, so that they know that they've made sure that the service is going to work for the people with the widest range of skills possible. So it starts here at 1 with never have and never will use the internet. It goes all the way up to 7, and that basically means you can use the internet. And that there's a whole kind of big range of skills down here, but all of those 1 to 6 basically means you can't use the internet. So I can tell you now, just by virtue of being in this room, regardless of what your coding ability is like, you're all going to be at number 9 at least. Because you guys are going to use computers every day in one form or another. So as far as that concerns with the greater population, you're way more skilled than pretty much anyone else. So the basic digital skills, what takes you to number 7 here, I think is kind of an important benchmark to know about. So the basic digital skills, find, manage and store digital information and content. So that means, can you use Google? Can you communicate, interact, collaborate, share and connect with others? So basically, can you use Facebook? Transacting, purchase and sell goods and services. Organise your finance and use digital government services. So do you use online banking? Can you use Amazon or eBay? Services like that. Problem solving, increase independence and confidence by solving problems and finding solutions using digital tools. So as far as we're concerned, that probably means Stack Overflow, but I think most people out there probably don't use that daily basis. So that's probably using like an FAQ or using Google to figure out the answer to a problem. And creating, create basic digital content in order to engage with digital communities and organisations. So probably uploading a photo to Instagram, I guess. And that's it. All of those things on that slide, I'm betting that all of you have, well, the majority of you have probably done at least 4 of those today, I think. And yet, that's not the reality for a lot of people. So, up to number 4 here, so that's 14% of the population who basically don't use the internet at all. that 14% of people can't do any single one of those skills. There's a further 7% then who can do one or more of those skills. So that's a lot of people still that can't do what we would do without even thinking about it. It's 11.3 million people actually in the UK. And yeah, okay, so 79% of people, 42.6 million people, do use the internet and can do those things, and that is growing every year, which is great. But the point is that we kind of make things for us because we're all experts. In the past 25 years, we've been designing software mostly for people who design software. If we use our own abilities as a baseline, we make things that are easy for some people to use, but difficult for everyone else. It's all about empathy. You need to have empathy for the people who are actually using your software. They're not like you. They're probably not even like your friends because they're your friends, so they're more likely to be like you. They may be closer to your family, but even your family are probably going to be more like you than most people. This is an example which I'm never sure about whether to include this slide or not. It makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, but it's a genuine experience of someone on Twitter, so I kind of wanted to share it with you. I find it quite upsetting. So this is obviously a company who maybe doesn't have a particularly diverse group of engineers and hasn't really considered people outside their group of engineers, and obviously hasn't done any real user testing. And that has genuine real-world results as because of that. Everybody involved in making digital interactions in any kind can help with this kind of thing. Obviously, if you are an engineer, you can make sure that you test with VoiceOver, for example. But if you work in HR, you can make sure that the teams you're helping to put together have the widest range of experiences possible. We all have our own implicit biases. We can't get away from that. But by making sure that your teams have a wider range of implicit bias, it means that you're going to get that breadth of knowledge and breadth of experience. If you're working in product, you can consider when you're putting together product ideas that how is this going to work for people with different abilities. If you work in support, you can make sure that you understand the extra time and support and help that maybe people with mental illness or with learning difficulties might need. And as I say, everybody really involved in these has the ability to help with this, and that includes your customers if you allow them to. A whole kind of range of advice in terms of things that you can do to make accessibility work better in your app. And I could kind of do tens of slides full of tips like this, but that's kind of not really the point. The point is that we need to try and, as engineers, as anyone working in software, to have empathy towards the people that are using our apps. There is a phrase that I think has done a lot of damage to software in the last few years, and that really discourages empathy within software, and that's move fast and break things. So I'd like to suggest an alternative that we can maybe use to help encourage us to have more empathy and to create better software. Work in a considered and empathetic manner to progressively improve the experience for as many people as possible. Thank you. I would be happy to take any questions if anyone has any. Otherwise, just find me at the break, and that's fine.
Anyone got any questions? Well, maybe we switch over with Rob or with James, sorry, while we do any questions.
I guess I was going to say, what was the big pull with FaceTime? Because there was Skype and other things that were available for people that needed those technologies. Was it the fact that it was just default installed, or was it?
I think it was mostly that it was kind of the first time you could really easily do it on a smartphone. So I think you could do Skype to some extent, but it wasn't as reliable as FaceTime. And a lot of sign language users at that time did use Skype, but really only used it on the desktop. And I think part of it was the quality as well, because obviously to be able to see the hand movements, particularly if you're doing finger spelling, you're going to need to have reasonable definition on the finger spelling, but also they used the shape of the mouth and the face quite a lot as well, so you need pretty good definition on that. And really FaceTime was the first time that you could get good enough quality to do that on a smartphone.
Quick follow-up question to that. Do sign language users need both hands? Can they hold like the phone in one hand and sign with one hand?
You really kind of need both hands for it. Most signs, so if you're doing finger spelling, that's all on kind of one hand. I learnt some last week, so I want to show some off. So A, B, anyway, I won't do the whole thing. I know that's thank you, I knew that anyway. Tired is the only one I really remember, because I'm just going to use that quite a lot. But yeah, they use both hands for pretty much all signs, and also they do use face and mouth quite a lot as well.
So generally got iPad or iPhone on stand.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Were you saying to be empathetic to sort of people that may be outside your outside your circle as well? Is the infographic, the Microsoft one, do you think that covers like a good enough range, or are there like, because I guess you just need to know who you're supposed to be empathetic for, like if you don't know what you don't know.
Sure. So the infographic that they produce on their website only has really 4 examples. They do one for was it speech, vision, motor, and something else.
Touch.
Yes, touch. So those are kind of generally, when you're talking about categories of accessibility tool, they would fall into those sort of 4 categories. So that's why they do those 4. But I mean, there's got to be kind of more than 4 examples of that. And so, if one kind of example that I give, if people say, well, how do I go to my teams and how do we talk about this? I say, well, look at that list of 4 examples, come up with more, because there's going to be tons more. If you think of, okay, someone with a certain disability, what other people would benefit if you consider how it's going to work. Microsoft suggests starting from a disability and kind of say, look, if you consider this disability, it's going to help out these people. But it's some other people do it the other way around and kind of go, if we do this tool, what people will benefit with that. So you could do it either way around, really. But I think the benefit of doing it, of starting with the disabilities, you can kind of go, okay, you can try and kind of think about how they would use something and think, okay, what problems would this person have in our app, and then kind of try and solve those problems for them.
Cool. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.